So, did you succeed? Let's solve this together. We got this new expense component, and that's where we render the expense form. In the end, I want to render this form conditionally now. I want to make sure that it's only shown sometimes, and that in some cases, instead of the form, I'm showing a button. So therefore, I'll add such a button here, and on this button we could say add new expense. And when this button is clicked, the form should be shown, and when the form is submitted or cancelled, the button should be shown. That means that we need to register a new state here, because we'll have a brand new state for our application, or this part of the application. We have the state that we're currently adding or editing an expense, let's say. So we have this editing state where the form should be open, and we have the other state where we are currently not working on an expense, where the button should be shown instead. So we'll have a brand new state which should conditionally be rendered on the screen, and therefore we need to add state to this component, a new state variable, so to say. So let's import useState here into the new expense component and call it here. And we simply need a true or false state, which basically just saves whether the form should be shown or not. And initially we can start with false, and we could name this state, let's say, is editing, and set is editing is the state updating function. And we then add a simple new function here, the start editing function, start editing handler function maybe, which does one simple thing. It sets is editing to true. Because this function should be triggered when this button is clicked, which then in turn should lead to this form showing up. So on this button we can add the onClick prop and point at the start editing handler function when it's clicked, so that set is editing is set to true when this button is clicked. And now we can use the is editing state to control which of the two elements here is shown. We want to show the button if we are not editing, hence the exclamation mark at the beginning. And here I'll do this in one line using this AND trick. Of course, you could also work with a variable with a default value and a if check, or with a ternary expression. But instead, I will simply have two dynamic expressions down there, check if is editing is false, in which case I show the button, and check if is editing is true, in which case I show the form. Now, if I save this, we see that button, and if we click the button, we see the form. Inside of the form, we now also want to add a cancel button and make sure that when the form is submitted, we also stop editing. So in expense form, we can add a button side by side to the add expense button and simply say cancel. Set the type to button so that this button does not submit the form. And instead add a click handler here to execute a function when this button is pressed. Now in the end, we don't really want to execute a function in here though, in the expense form component, but a function in the new expense component. There we can add a stop editing handler function, and that's the function where we want to set is editing to false. So to stop editing. And that's the function which we in the end want to trigger if that cancel button is pressed in the expense form component. Now you learned how you can make this work. We just need to pass a pointer at this function down to the expense form component. So here we can add a new prop and, for example, name this onCancel. The name is up to you. And simply point at the stop editing handler for this prop. So that this function, the stop editing handler function, is passed as a value to the onCancel prop in the expense form component. And hence in the expense form component, we now can simply point at props onCancel here for a click on this button. So that this function, which we receive on the onCancel prop, is forwarded to the onClick prop of this button. So that for a click on the button, the function stored in onCancel is executed. And that, of course, is that stop editing handler function. Now we also want to close the form if it's submitted. So in the save expense data handler, here I also want to set is editing to false. And with that, if I reload, I can open the form like this, I can cancel, but I can also submit something, pick any value here, and it also closes. So this is now working, and that's the challenge solved. Now we also render the form conditionally with the logic we gathered over the last lectures.